I learned that night how easily a life can pivot on the wrong door, the wrong face, the wrong desperate need for $10 an hour. The Vale Hotel's 37th floor smelled of money and marble polish. I pushed my cart down the hallway, wheels squeaking against imported stone that cost more than I'd earned in 6 months. The afternoon light through floor-to-ceiling windows cut sharp angles across my reflection, rumpled uniform, hollow cheeks, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't cure. I'd been cleaning these halls for 8 months, long enough to know which guests left crumpled hundreds as tips and which ones complained about imaginary dust. Suite 307 was my last stop. I knocked twice, waited, heard nothing. Standard procedure for a room that should have been empty. The previous night's guest had checked out at dawn, according to my sheet. I swiped my master key and stepped inside. The door slammed behind me. "Why are you so late?" The voice came from the shadows near the windows. Deep, rough with something that might have been relief. "I've been waiting for you for so long." I turned toward the sound and found myself staring at a man who looked like he'd been carved from expensive stone. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a white shirt that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Dark hair, darker eyes, the kind of face that belonged on billboards selling things I'd never afford. He moved toward me with the fluid confidence of someone who'd never been told no. An alpha. I could smell it on him, pine and leather and something dangerous. "I think there's been," I started, but he was already reaching for me. His hands found my waist, pulled me against him with startling gentleness. The cleaning cart clattered forgotten to one side. This close, I could see the exhaustion around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched like he was fighting something invisible. "Don't," he said, voice low and broken. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I should have pushed him away. Should have explained the mistake, shown him my badge, demanded he release me. Instead, I found myself drowning in his scent, in the desperate need radiating from his skin. When was the last time anyone had touched me like this? Like I was something precious instead of something to be endured? "Please," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I was asking for. He kissed me then. Soft at first, testing, then harder when I didn't pull away. His hands tangled in my hair, and I tasted coffee and something bitter on his tongue. The rational part of my mind, the part that had kept me alive through bankruptcy and homelessness and 8 months of scrubbing other people's messes, screamed warnings I couldn't hear over the thunder of my pulse. But the rational part of my mind had never been held like this. He lifted me easily, carried me toward the bedroom like I weighed nothing. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, probably worth more than my entire wardrobe. I should have laughed at the absurdity. Noah Hayes, the broke Omega who ate ramen for dinner, being laid down on 1,000-thread-count fabric by a man who smelled like power and expensive cologne. Instead, I reached for him. "What's your name?" he asked, fingers tracing my jaw with unexpected tenderness. I almost told him. Almost gave him the truth along with everything else. But something held me back. Maybe pride, maybe instinct, maybe the knowledge that names had power I couldn't afford to give away. "Does it matter?" I said instead. He studied my face for a long moment, then shook his head. "No, nothing matters but this." The rest happened in fragments. His shirt hitting the floor, the whisper of fabric and skin, the way he said beautiful like it was a prayer and a curse. How carefully he touched me, as if I might break or disappear. The taste of salt and desperation when I kissed his throat. The moment when careful became urgent, when touch became need, when I forgot everything except the weight of him above me and the sound of my name. Except he didn't know my name. Did he? Afterward, we lay twisted in sheets that smelled like sweat and secrets. His arm across my chest, fingers drawing absent patterns on my skin. Outside the windows, the city sparkled 40 floors below. All those lives, all those stories, none of them touching us in our stolen bubble of warmth. "Stay," he said against my hair. Not a question. Not quite a command. I should have left then. Should have gathered my scattered clothes and dignity and walked away. But his breathing was evening out, his grip loosening as sleep claimed him. He looked younger in the dim light, less like the predator who'd pulled me into his orbit, and more like the lonely man I'd glimpsed beneath the expensive facade. So I stayed. I watched him sleep and tried to memorize the feeling of being wanted. Not needed. I'd been needed plenty, by family members who spent money we didn't have and employers who paid wages that wouldn't cover basic dignity. But wanted? When was the last time someone had looked at me like I was the answer to a question they'd been afraid to ask? Morning would come. Reality would reassert itself. I would remember that fairy tales were for people who could afford happy endings, and men like him didn't fall for cleaning boys from nowhere. But for now, in the space between heartbeats, I let myself pretend that mistakes could sometimes turn into miracles. The city lights blurred through unshed tears I refused to acknowledge. Outside, the world spun on its merciless axis, grinding up dreams and spitting out survivors. Inside Suite 307, for just a few hours, I wasn't surviving. I was living. I woke to the sound of money. Not the jingle of coins in a pocket or the whisper of bills being counted. The sound of my own heart breaking, sharp and final as glass hitting concrete. Because there, on the nightstand where a lover might leave flowers or a phone number, sat a neat stack of hundreds. Clean, crisp, insulting in their perfection. The bed beside me was cold. I lay there for a long moment, staring at the ceiling that probably cost more per square foot than I earned in a month. The Egyptian cotton sheets felt different now, not luxurious, but contaminated. Evidence of a transaction I hadn't known I was making. The note was tucked under the corner of the stack, cream-colored paper that matched the hotel's expensive stationery. I recognized the logo even upside down. The veil, written in gold script that whispered of old money and older power. My hands shook as I unfolded it. I'm hooked. Come see me again every Friday, same time, Suite 307. No signature. No name. Just instructions delivered with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I counted the money twice, then a third time because the number seemed impossible. $2,000. More cash than I'd seen in one place since before my father's business collapsed, before the bankruptcy, before I learned that dignity was a luxury I couldn't afford. But apparently, I could be afforded. You bastard, I whispered to the empty room. The words tasted like ash and old dreams. Don't let me see you again, or I'll punch you in the face. Empty threats from an empty man. I could threaten all I wanted, but we both knew the truth. Men like him didn't worry about consequences from men like me. I gathered my scattered clothes from the marble floor. My uniform looked even shabbier in the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The fabric was wrinkled, stained with industrial bleach, and the particular desperation of someone who owned 3 shirts and washed them all by hand in a communal sink. The shower in his bathroom had more settings than my studio apartment had rooms. I stood under water that never ran cold and tried to wash away the feeling of being purchased. But some stains go deeper than skin. When I stepped out, the mirror showed me the truth I'd been avoiding. Hollow cheeks, dark circles, the kind of thin that came from skipping meals to make rent. No wonder he'd thought. No, I wouldn't finish that thought. Wouldn't give voice to the poison spreading through my chest. I dressed quickly, avoiding my reflection. The money still sat on the nightstand, mocking me with its casual abundance. $2,000. Enough to pay rent for 3 months. Enough to buy real food instead of ramen and hope. Enough to pretend I was a person instead of just a body keeping a uniform upright. I left it there. The elevator down seemed to take forever. Each floor that passed was another reminder of the distance between his world and mine. 40 floors of vertical class divide, measured in marble and misery. The housekeeping break room smelled like industrial coffee and broken dreams. My coworkers looked up when I entered. Maria with her 3 kids and 2 jobs, Carlos with his night school textbooks and permanent exhaustion. People who understood that survival was an art form and dignity was a luxury none of us could afford. You look like hell, Maria said, not unkindly. I poured coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through despair. Feel worse. But I didn't tell them about the money upstairs. Didn't mention the note, or the way he'd looked at me in the lamplight. How do you explain that for a few hours, you'd forgotten you were poor? That someone had touched you like you mattered, like you were worth something beyond the minimum wage stamped on your time card? How do you admit that the worst part wasn't being mistaken for a prostitute? It was realizing that maybe you weren't worth more than one. My shift started at noon. I pushed my cart through the same hallways, past the same imported marble, under the same crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's cars. But everything looked different now. Sharper. Like I was seeing the hotel through new eyes. Eyes that had learned the exact price of everything, including myself. Room 1247 needed fresh towels. The guest had left a $5 tip on the dresser. I stared at it for a long time, thinking about the stack of hundreds I'd abandoned upstairs. About the casual cruelty of men who could afford to buy people, and the particular desperation of those who couldn't afford to say no. I took the $5. Because that's what I was worth, apparently. Somewhere between charity and transaction, between pity and purchase. Not enough to matter, but just enough to survive another day. The afternoon shift stretched ahead like a sentence I hadn't finished serving. 40 more rooms to clean, 40 more reminders of the distance between what I wanted and what I could have. But at least I knew where I stood now. At least the mirror couldn't lie to me anymore. Friday came like a debt collector, inevitable and unwelcome. I'd spent 3 days pretending the note didn't exist. That Suite 307 was just another room with expensive furniture and imported shame. But Mrs. Rodriguez found me in the supply closet that afternoon, clipboard in hand, and the particular expression she wore when someone was about to get screwed. "Hayes," she said, not looking up from her schedule. "You're on 37 today. Suite 307 needs a deep clean." The industrial bleach I was measuring sloshed over the rim of the bottle. "I can't. Send Carlos." Carlos called in sick. She finally looked at me, dark eyes sharp with the suspicion of someone who'd managed housekeeping staff for 20 years. "Besides, the guest specifically requested you." My blood turned to ice water. Requested. High roller. Pays premium for personalized service. The way she said it made my skin crawl. "Don't screw this up, Hayes. We need clients like him." I wanted to tell her what her precious client had done. Wanted to explain about the money, the note, the casual assumption that I could be purchased like room service or fresh towels. Instead, I nodded and hated myself for the cowardice. Because Mrs. Rodriguez was right. We did need clients like him. And I needed this job more than I needed my dignity. The elevator ride to the 37th floor felt like ascending to my own execution. Each floor that passed was another chance to run, another moment of safety I was leaving behind. My hands shook as I pushed the cart down the familiar hallway, past windows that reflected nothing but approaching darkness. I knocked on 307. Waited. Heard footsteps approaching like thunder. The door opened, and there he was. He looked different in the afternoon light. Still handsome in that carved-from expensive stone way, but hungrier. More desperate. His white shirt was wrinkled, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that belonged in a men's cologne advertisement. When he saw me, something flashed across his face. Relief, maybe, or possession. "You came," he said, voice rough with something I didn't want to identify. "I work here." The words came out harder than I intended. Good. Let him hear the anger. Let him know that whatever he thought we were, whatever transaction he believed he'd arranged, I wasn't the same broken boy who'd melted at his touch. He stepped aside, but his eyes never left my face. I pushed my cart past him, hyper-aware of every inch of space between us. The suite smelled like him, pine and leather, and that dangerous something that made my hindbrain whisper surrender. I ignored it. "You don't have to pretend," he said, closing the door with a quiet click that sounded like a trap snapping shut. "We both know why you're here." I started wiping down surfaces that were already spotless. "I'm here to clean your room. That's what I do." But he was already moving toward me, crossing the space between us with fluid predator grace. Before I could step away, his hands were on my waist, pulling me against him with the same startling gentleness as before. "Oh, my little Omega," he murmured against my ear, breath hot and commanding. "You must be a male prostitute cosplaying as a cleaner, huh? I love it even more." I shoved him away, hard enough that he stumbled backward. "I'm not, I don't." But his mouth was already on mine, swallowing my protests with hungry desperation. For a moment, my traitorous body remembered the taste of him, the way his hands had mapped my skin like he was memorizing something precious. The rational part of my mind screamed warnings that got lost in the thunder of my pulse. Then I bit his lip. Not hard enough to draw blood, but hard enough to make him jerk back with surprise. His eyes were dark with want and something else, confusion, maybe, or the first stirring of doubt. "I told you," I said, backing toward my cart with its humble collection of rags and spray bottles. "I work here. I clean rooms. I'm not whoever you think I am." He studied me for a long moment, head tilted like a wolf trying to identify an unfamiliar scent. "But you came back. The money. I left your money." The lie tasted like copper and old shame, but I held his gaze. "I don't want your money." Something shifted in his expression. Before he could respond, someone knocked on the door. We both froze. The knock came again, followed by a voice I didn't recognize. "Room service." He moved toward the door like a man walking toward his own judgment. I watched his hand hesitate on the handle, saw the moment when certainty crumbled into doubt. The door opened to reveal a young man about my age, but everything else was different. Bleached hair, designer clothes that looked like a costume, the particular kind of artificial confidence that came from expensive preparation. He was beautiful in the way that magazines taught you to want, all sharp angles and practiced seduction. He was also very clearly not me. "Sorry I'm late," the stranger said, stepping into the room with professional familiarity. "Traffic was murder." "You ready to?" He stopped when he saw me standing there with my cleaning cart, taking in my rumpled uniform and industrial bleach stains. Understanding dawned across his face like sunrise over wreckage. The silence stretched between the three of us, heavy with implications none of us wanted to voice. I saw the exact moment when my mystery alpha realized what had happened, when the expensive facade cracked enough to show the horror underneath. I didn't wait for explanations or apologies. I ran. Down the hallway, past imported marble and crystal chandeliers, past the elevator that would have trapped me in a small space with my humiliation. I took the stairs instead, 40 flights of concrete and fluorescent lighting that smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. By the time I reached the parking garage, my lungs were burning and my vision was blurred with tears I refused to acknowledge. Behind me, Suite 307 held its secrets. Ahead of me, the world spun on its merciless axis, grinding up mistakes and spitting out survivors. The summons came on Monday, delivered with the casual cruelty of paperwork. "Hayes." Mrs. Rodriguez barely looked up from her clipboard. "Executive floor tonight. CEO wants his office cleaned after hours. 6 p.m. sharp." I kept folding towels, focusing on the mechanical precision of corner-to-corner alignment. "Why me?" "Because he asked for you specifically." Her voice carried the particular edge she used when she suspected drama but didn't have time to investigate. "Don't ask questions. Just do your job." But questions were all I had left. I'd spent the weekend avoiding mirrors and pretending I didn't dream about pine-scented breath against my throat. The mystery alpha from Suite 307 haunted my sleep like a fever, all hands and heat, and the terrible knowledge that I'd wanted him even after he'd tried to buy me. That I still wanted him, despite everything my rational mind screamed about power and dignity and the difference between desire and transaction. Now someone else wanted me. Someone with enough influence to request specific staff members, enough money to own this marble monument to other people's labor. The executive floor smelled different. Less bleach, more leather, and expensive cologne. The carpets were thicker here, designed to muffle the footsteps of men who owned the world and everyone in it. I pushed my cart past portraits of stern-faced executives, past windows that offered panoramic views of a city I could never afford to truly inhabit. The CEO's office sat at the end of the hallway like a temple to accumulated wealth. I knocked twice, heard a familiar voice say, "Come in," and felt my world shift on its axis. He sat behind a desk that probably cost more than I'd earn in 5 years, backlit by floor-to-ceiling windows that made him look like a photograph in a business magazine. The same dark hair, the same carved features, the same dangerous smile that had haunted my dreams. Grayson Vale. The nameplate on his desk proclaimed it in gold letters that caught the lamplight like accusations. "Hello, Noah." My name in his mouth sounded like ownership. I stood frozen in the doorway, cleaning supplies suddenly feeling like weapons I didn't know how to use. Behind me, the hallway stretched toward an elevator that might as well have been on another planet. Ahead of me, the man who'd mistaken me for a prostitute lounged in his executive chair like a king holding court. "You're him." The words fell from my lips like stones. "You own this place." "I own several places." He stood, moved around the desk with that fluid predator grace I remembered too well. "But yes, this one is mine." The power differential had always been obvious. His expensive clothes, my industrial uniform, his suite, my studio apartment. But this was something else entirely. This was the distance between gods and mortals, between those who owned and those who were owned. I should go. I backed toward the door, but he was already moving to intercept me. "Noah, wait." His voice was softer now, almost gentle. "I want to apologize for what happened. I didn't know. That I was human?" The bitterness in my voice surprised us both. "That I had a name? A job? A life that didn't revolve around your convenience?" He stopped just out of arm's reach, studying my face with those dark eyes that saw too much. "I thought you were someone else. I know exactly who you thought I was." "Do you?" He stepped closer, and I caught that scent again, pine and leather, and something dangerous that made my hindbrain whisper surrender. Because I'm not sure I do anymore. His hand reached toward my face, fingers almost touching my jaw before I stepped back. I have to work, I said, grateful my voice didn't shake. If you don't mind. Something flickered across his expression, surprise, maybe, or respect. He nodded and returned to his chair, but his eyes never left me as I began the familiar ritual of cleaning. I wiped down surfaces that were already pristine, dusted furniture that had never seen a speck of dirt. He watched every movement like I was performing for his entertainment. Maybe I was. Maybe this was just another transaction, another way for him to possess something he found momentarily interesting. You left the money, he said after a while. I kept my back to him, focusing on organizing papers that didn't need organizing. I told you, I'm not for sale. Everyone's for sale. His chair creaked as he leaned back. It's just a matter of finding the right price. I turned to face him then, holding his gaze across the expanse of his office. Maybe in your world. Not in mine. We're in my world now, Noah. He said my name like he was tasting it, rolling it around his mouth like expensive wine. We have been since you walked through that door. The truth of it settled over me like ice water. Here, surrounded by his wealth and power, wearing a uniform that marked me as his employee, I was exactly what he'd thought I was in Suite 307. Property. But I cleaned his office anyway, because I needed the job more than I needed my pride. Because dignity was a luxury I couldn't afford, and survival was an art form that required small compromises with large consequences. When I finished, he was still watching me with those dark eyes that promised things I couldn't name. Same time tomorrow, he said as I gathered my supplies. Not a request. An instruction. He started hunting me on Tuesday. Not in any way that would leave evidence or witnesses. Nothing that would hold up in court or justify a restraining order. Just the particular attention of someone accustomed to acquiring things he wanted, applied with the surgical precision of inherited wealth. I felt him watching me through security cameras as I pushed my cart down marble hallways. Heard my name whispered in conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Found myself assigned to floors I'd never worked before, always within sight of executive offices with floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected nothing but my own growing paranoia. By Thursday, I was jumping at shadows. By Friday, the shadows had teeth. I left work through the service entrance as always, taking the long way around the building to avoid the main lobby where guests in $1,000 suits sipped wine that cost more than my monthly rent. The October air bit through my jacket with the particular cruelty of a city that charged extra for warmth. Rain began to fall as I reached the bus stop. At first, just a fine mist that turned the streetlights into halos of false hope. Then harder, the kind of downpour that turned cheap fabric transparent and reminded you exactly how far you were from shelter. I huddled under the inadequate overhang with 3 other people who looked like they understood the mathematics of survival, counting coins, checking phone screens for buses that never seemed to come. The black car pulled up like a shark surfacing in dark water. Sleek, expensive, the kind of vehicle that whispered about money and power and the casual ability to buy whatever caught your eye. The passenger window rolled down with mechanical precision, revealing a face I'd been trying to forget for days. "Get in," Grayson said. Not a request. Never a request with him. "I'm fine." I pulled my jacket tighter, as if thin fabric could protect me from more than just rain. "Bus will be here soon." He glanced at his phone, then at the empty street where no bus appeared. "It's 8 minutes late. You're soaked. Get in the car, Noah." The way he said my name made it sound like ownership, like he'd already decided the outcome of this conversation and was just waiting for me to catch up. I said I'm fine, but the rain was coming down harder now, turning the October night into something that felt like drowning slowly. The other people at the bus stop had already scattered, finding doorways or giving up entirely. I stood there alone, water dripping from my hair, watching him watch me through glass that probably cost more than I earned in a month. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he said, echoing words from another night in another room where I'd made the mistake of trusting him. Thunder rolled overhead like divine judgment. The rain intensified, turning the street into a river of reflected neon and broken promises. I was shivering now, teeth chattering with cold, and something else I didn't want to name. He leaned across to open the passenger door. I got in. The car was warm, leather seats heated to the perfect temperature for comfort. Classical music played softly from speakers that probably cost more than my entire stereo system. He handed me a towel, soft, expensive, monogrammed with initials I recognized from hotel stationery. Better. I dried my hair without answering, hyper-aware of the space between us in the confined intimacy of his car. He smelled like pine and leather, and that dangerous something that made my hindbrain whisper surrender. Outside, the rain painted abstract patterns on the windows, turning the city into impressionist art. "Where do you live?" he asked, already pulling into traffic with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. I gave him the address, because what else was there to do? Because I was cold and wet and tired of fighting battles I couldn't win. Because sometimes surrender felt like the only form of rebellion left. He didn't comment on the neighborhood, though I saw his jaw tighten when we passed the check-cashing place and the bar with bulletproof glass between the customers and the alcohol. My building rose like a monument to good intentions and deferred maintenance. 12 stories of subsidized housing for people who'd learned that dignity was a luxury they couldn't afford. "This is me," I said when he pulled up to the curb. But he was already turning off the engine. "It's raining too hard," he said, looking up at clouds that were indeed unleashing a biblical downpour. "I can't drive in this. I'll have to stay until it stops." I stared at him through the dim light of the car's interior. "Stay where?" "Your place," said like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Like I'd invited him, like I wanted him there, like my tiny studio apartment was equipped to host someone who probably had never seen a fold-out couch or a hot plate. "That's not, you can't just." But he was already getting out, already moving around to my side of the car with that fluid predator grace. Already acting like the decision had been made by forces beyond our control. Maybe it had been. My apartment was exactly what you'd expect for someone earning minimum wage in a city that charged premium prices for basic dignity. 400 square feet of optimism and compromise, with a kitchenette that doubled as a dining room and a bathroom that required strategic positioning to avoid hitting your elbows on the walls. He looked around with the polite interest of someone viewing an exhibit about how the other half lived. "Cozy," he said, and I couldn't tell if he was being kind or cruel. I made coffee because it gave me something to do with my hands, something to focus on besides the way he seemed to fill the entire space with his presence. He sat on my couch, my only chair really, and looked perfectly at ease despite the circumstances. "This wasn't planned," he said, watching me measure instant coffee into mismatched mugs. "Nothing about you seems planned." I kept my back to him, focusing on the familiar ritual of boiling water on a hot plate that had seen better decades. "You just happen to things. Is that what I did to you? Happened to you?" I turned to face him then, holding his gaze across the tiny expanse of my life. "What would you call it?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those dark eyes that saw too much. Outside, thunder rolled across the city like distant artillery, and rain continued to paint abstract patterns on windows that hadn't been cleaned by professional staff. "I'd call it fate," he said finally. The coffee finished brewing with a hiss of steam and broken dreams. I poured 2 cups, added sugar to mine because I couldn't afford cream, handed him his black because men like him probably didn't compromise. "I should sleep on the couch," he said when the rain showed no signs of stopping. "I can't drive in this weather." Another non-request. Another decision made by forces beyond our control. But when I woke in the morning, I found him in my bed, arms wrapped around me with the possessive gentleness of someone claiming territory. His breath was warm against my neck, his body solid and reassuring against my back. "I can't sleep alone," he murmured when he felt me stir. "I haven't been able to sleep alone for years." And despite everything my rational mind screamed about boundaries and manipulation and the difference between care and control, I let him hold me. Because sometimes the warmest prison is still warmer than freedom. Because sometimes surrender feels like the only victory left. The nausea started on a Tuesday morning, sharp and unexpected as a bill you can't afford. I blamed the instant coffee at first. Then the stress of living under constant surveillance, of feeling Grayson's eyes following me through security cameras and reflective surfaces. But when I found myself bent over a toilet in the staff bathroom for the 3rd time that week, retching up nothing but bile and bitter truths I knew. The pregnancy test cost $12. 2 hours of wages, spent in a pharmacy where the teenage clerk avoided eye contact and bagged my purchase with the particular discretion reserved for shame and desperation. 2 lines, clear as accusations, definitive as gravity. I stared at that plastic oracle until my vision blurred, thinking about choices I'd never had and consequences I couldn't afford. about the mathematics of survival when your body was no longer entirely your own. Grayson found me in his office that evening, cleaning surfaces that were already pristine with hands that shook like autumn leaves. "You look pale," he said, and I heard genuine concern beneath the calculated observation. "Are you sick?" I kept polishing his desk, focusing on the mechanical precision of circular motions. "I'm fine." But he was already moving around the massive piece of furniture, crossing the space between us with that fluid predator grace. His hand touched my forehead with unexpected gentleness, checking for fever like he actually cared about my well-being. "You're not fine." His thumb traced the hollow beneath my eye, mapping exhaustion like it was foreign territory. "When did you last eat?" The question hit harder than it should have. When had I last eaten? This morning's coffee, yesterday's ramen, a granola bar stolen from the hotel's complimentary breakfast because dignity was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. "I eat," I said, but the words sounded hollow even to me. "Real food. Not whatever you've been surviving on." His voice carried the particular edge of someone discovering poverty for the first time, like it was an exotic disease that required immediate treatment. "Come on. I'm taking you to dinner. I have work to finish." "No." His hand settled on my arm, not rough but immovable. "You have me to finish. And right now, I'm finishing you dinner." He took me to the kind of restaurant where they didn't list prices on the menu, where servers spoke in hushed tones about wine pairings and seasonal ingredients. I sat across from him in my work clothes, acutely aware of the industrial bleach stains on my uniform and the way other diners glanced at me with polite curiosity. "Order whatever you want," he said, studying me over wine that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I ordered soup. Something simple, something my stomach might actually keep down. He ordered half the menu with the casual confidence of someone who'd never counted calories or dollars or small compromises with large consequences. "So," he said when the food arrived, "tell me what's really wrong." I stirred my soup, watching steam rise like prayers I didn't know how to voice. The broth smelled rich and complex, the kind of nourishment I'd forgotten existed beyond ramen packets and instant coffee. "I'm pregnant." The words fell between us like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread outward in silence. He went very still, wine glass halfway to his lips, dark eyes searching my face for some sign I was lying. "How do you know?" "The same way anyone knows." I took a sip of soup that tasted like expensive hope. "Test doesn't lie." "Is it?" He set down his glass with careful precision. "Am I?" "You're the only one." The admission tasted like copper and old shame. "There's only been you." Something shifted in his expression, surprise giving way to something else. Possession, maybe, or the particular satisfaction of ownership confirmed. He reached across the table, covering my hand with his like he was claiming territory. "We'll figure this out," he said. "I'll take care of everything." But his version of care looked like acquisition. The next morning brought documents. Lawyers' papers spread across my kitchen table like battle plans drawn by someone who'd never seen the front lines. Deed transfers for a house in a neighborhood where I'd never belong. Car registration for a vehicle that cost more than most people's college education. Bank statements showing accounts with more zeros than I could process. "It's all yours," he said, standing in my tiny apartment like a king surveying new territory. "The house comes fully furnished. The car's already insured. The account has enough to cover everything." I stared at the papers until the words blurred together. Deed. Title. Trust fund. Legal terminology for a life I'd never asked for, purchased with money I'd never earned. What am I supposed to do with all this? "Live," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Stop working. Stop worrying about money. Stop pretending you don't need help. I don't want your help." The words came out harder than I intended. "I don't want your house or your car or your guilt money." "It's not guilt money." His jaw tightened with the particular frustration of someone accustomed to having their generosity accepted without question. "It's responsibility. Responsibility looks different from where I'm standing. Then change where you're standing." He gestured at the documents like they were salvation instead of chains. "Take the house. Take the money. Take care of yourself and the baby." "Our baby," I corrected, and watched him flinch at the plural possessive. "If I'm keeping it." Silence stretched between us, heavy with implications neither of us wanted to voice. Outside, the city hummed with the particular energy of people who'd learned that survival was an art form and dignity was a luxury most couldn't afford. "Are you," he asked finally, "keeping it?" I looked around my apartment, 400 square feet of optimism and compromise, with a hot plate that had seen better decades and a couch that doubled as a bed. Then I looked at the papers on my table, promising a different life built on foundations I hadn't chosen. I don't know, I said, and meant it. Because sometimes the most honest answer is the one that admits you're drowning. Because sometimes responsibility and ownership were the same expensive suit. The invitation arrived on cream-colored paper that whispered of old money and older power. The Vale Hotel Group cordially invites you to the launch of our newest property. Cocktails at 7, dinner at 8. Black tie optional. I stared at the elegant script until the words blurred together. Why would they invite me? Noah Hayes, the Omega who cleaned toilets and counted bus fare, to an event where champagne flutes cost more than my monthly rent? It's a mistake, I told myself, but kept the invitation anyway. Because mistakes, I'd learned, sometimes turned into miracles. The grand ballroom sparkled like captured starlight, all crystal chandeliers and imported marble that reflected the careful smiles of people who owned the world. I stood near the service entrance in my only decent shirt, 3 years old, bought from a thrift store, but clean, watching guests drift between champagne fountains and conversations about acquisitions and market share. I didn't belong here. That much was obvious from the way servers glanced at me with professional curiosity, wondering if I was lost or delusional, or both. Then I saw him. Grayson stood near the stage in a tuxedo that probably cost more than I'd earned in 6 months, looking every inch the young CEO who'd built an empire on inherited wealth and calculated risks. He was speaking with a woman whose jewelry could have funded a small nation, but his eyes kept scanning the crowd, searching. When he found me, something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or the particular satisfaction of seeing a plan come together. He excused himself from his conversation and crossed the room with that fluid predator grace, cutting through clusters of people who automatically stepped aside for someone who owned their paychecks. "You came," he said when he reached me. "I got an invitation." I held up the cream-colored paper like evidence in a trial I didn't understand, though I'm pretty sure it was meant for someone else. It was meant for exactly the right person. His hand settled on the small of my back, warm and possessive through thin fabric. "Come with me." Before I could protest, he was guiding me through the crowd toward the stage where a microphone waited like a confession booth. People turned to watch us pass, these titans of industry and their carefully curated partners, wondering who the poorly dressed Omega was and why their host was treating him like something precious. I wondered the same thing. The stage lights were harsh, turning everything beyond the podium into shadows and suggestion. Grayson stepped up to the microphone with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, leaving me standing in the wings like an understudy who'd forgotten his lines. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice carrying easily across the suddenly quiet ballroom. "Thank you for joining us tonight. I know you came expecting to hear about our newest hotel property, about market expansion and profit projections." Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. I felt eyes settling on me like weight, wondering why I was there, why I mattered enough to share the stage with someone who could buy and sell most of them without checking his account balance. "But tonight isn't about hotels," Grayson continued, his gaze finding mine across the space between stage and shadows. "Tonight is about something more valuable than real estate or revenue streams." My heart stopped. Tonight is about opening my heart to the one Omega who never asked for anything, who taught me the difference between price and worth, who showed me that some mistakes turn into the most important moments of your life. The crowd murmured with the particular curiosity reserved for unexpected revelations. Somewhere in the darkness, champagne glasses clinked like distant wind chimes, marking time in a moment that felt suspended between heartbeats. He stepped down from the podium, crossed to where I stood frozen in disbelief, and dropped to one knee. The ballroom went silent. "Noah Hayes," he said, voice carrying despite the absence of microphone amplification. "Will you come live in Suite 307, with me for the rest of our lives?" The ring appeared from nowhere, a simple band that caught the stage lights and threw them back in fragments of captured fire. Not the kind of ostentatious display I might have expected from someone who measured worth in market share and acquisition reports. Just elegant metal and the promise of something that might be love if I was brave enough to believe it. The silence stretched like a held breath. I stared down at him, this man who'd mistaken me for a prostitute, who'd tried to buy my affection with houses and cars and trust funds, who'd confused control with care for so long that genuine vulnerability looked foreign on his face. But here he was, kneeling on marble that cost more per square foot than I earned in a week, offering me something that wasn't about money or power or the casual assumption that everything had a price. He was offering me his name, his life, his truth. "You don't even know me," I whispered, aware that hundreds of people were watching this moment unfold like theater. "I know you turned down $2,000 because you're not for sale." His voice was quiet now, meant for me alone despite the public stage. "I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know you taste like hope and stubbornness, and the kind of strength that comes from surviving things that would break other people." He paused, and for the first time since I'd known him, looked uncertain. "I know you're carrying my child, and that scares you because you think I see it as another acquisition, another thing to own." His hand found mine, fingers intertwining with careful reverence. "But I see it as proof that miracles happen when you least expect them. That mistakes can turn into the most important parts of your story." Tears I couldn't control started down my cheeks. "Grayson, I'm not asking you to forget what I did wrong. I'm asking you to let me spend the rest of my life doing it right." He squeezed my hand, and I felt calluses I hadn't expected. Evidence that beneath the expensive suits and inherited wealth was someone who understood that nothing worthwhile came without work. "Marry me, Noah. Not because you need my money, but because I need your forgiveness. Your laughter, your terrible coffee and your stubborn pride, and the way you see the world with eyes that haven't forgotten how to hope." The ballroom held its collective breath. I looked down at this man who'd entered my life like a hurricane, bringing chaos and heat and the kind of complications that changed everything. Who'd mistaken me for something I wasn't, and then spent weeks learning who I actually was. Who'd offered me houses and cars and bank accounts, but was now offering something infinitely more valuable. Himself. "Yes," I said, and the word tasted like morning after a long night, like possibility after despair. He slipped the ring onto my finger, a perfect fit, because of course he'd done his research, and stood to kiss me in front of an audience that probably included more collective wealth than most small nations possessed. But in that moment, surrounded by applause and camera flashes, and the particular energy of a room full of people witnessing something unexpected, all I could think about was the boy who'd walked into Suite 307 looking for work and found something else entirely. Later, in the quiet aftermath of congratulations and champagne toasts and questions about wedding dates, we stood alone on the hotel's rooftop terrace, looking out over a city that sparkled with the dreams and desperation of 8 million people trying to survive another day. "Do you regret it?" he asked, arms around me from behind, chin resting on my shoulder. I leaned back against his warmth and thought about the journey that had brought us here. The mistakes and misunderstandings. The power struggles and morning sickness. The slow recognition that love wasn't about owning someone, but about choosing to see them clearly, even when clarity revealed things you hadn't expected. "Ask me in 50 years, I said. But I already knew the answer. Some mistakes are worth making. Some fairy tales are worth believing. And sometimes, if you're very lucky or very stubborn or very desperate, the person who sees your worth is the same person willing to pay any price to prove it." Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next video.